My name is Nuki Damayanti and my partner Dian Aprianti. We are inviting you to discuss about the language variation. Let's start. Language variation. Variation is a characteristic of language. One way of characterizing certain variations is to say that speakers of a particular language sometimes speak different dialects of that language. The dialect itself is the varieties of language characteristic of groups of speakers, and it can be divided into two, the regional dialects and also the social dialects. In this view, the study of language variation tells us the important things about languages and how they change. Dialect geography, as this area of linguistic study is known, has employed assumptions and methods drawn from historical linguistics. In this view, languages differentiate internally as speakers distance themselves from one another over time and space. The changes result in the creation of dialects of the languages. For instance, in the family tree, Latin has branched and became French in France, and in Spain became Spanish and Italian in Italy. Dialect geographers have traditionally attempted to reproduce their findings on maps in what they call dialect atlases. The isogloss on one side of the line, people say something one way. For example, pronounce bath with the first vowel of father, and on the other side, they use some other pronunciation, for example, the vowel of cat. Isoglosses can also show that a particular set of linguistic features appears to be spreading from one location, a vocal area, into neighboring locations. The Rhenish fan is one of the best known sets of isoglosses in Europe. The setting of Low German to the north from High German to the south. The modern Standard German, giving variant forms for make, that, village, and I. Very often, the isoglosses for individual phonological features do not coincide with one another to give us clearly demarcated dialect areas. For example, in England, the isogloss that separates stood or come pronounced with A rather than I runs roughly east and west with the A to the north. It intersects the isogloss that separates varm pronounced with O without the R, which runs roughly northwest to the southeast with R to the west. As trigeals take a particular linguistic feature, which we will soon call a linguistic variable, and show its distribution geographically. They also attempt to relate that distribution to the historical development of the language, both internally, for example, linguistically, externally, politically, socially, and culturally. Dialect geographers have traditionally attempted to reproduce their findings on maps in what they call dialect atlases. They try to show the geographical boundaries of the distribution of a particular linguistic feature by drawing a line on a map. There are methodological issues which have caused sociolinguists to question some dialect studies. One of these issues has to do with the sample used for the research. First, sampling methods were based on assumptions about who representative speakers of dialect were. The dialect mixture that is the existence in one locality of two or more dialects which allow a speaker to speakers to draw now on one dialect and then on the other. An alternative explanation is free variation, that is, variation of no social significance. What is free variation? What vowel do you use in the first vowel of the word data? Or the initial sound of the words economic? Or either? Is there any difference in social meaning between those two pronunciations? Focus on social rather than regional variation in languages, that is, linguistic atlases. The major conceptual tool for investigation of such variation will be the linguistic variable. That said, the next discussion will be presented by my partner Dian. Dian, this is your time.
Thank you, Madam. Hi, my friends. I would like to present about the linguistic variable and the social variable. A linguistic variable is a linguistic item which has identifiable variants, which are the different from which can be used in an environment. For example, the words like singing and fishing are sometimes pronounced as singing and fishing. The final sounds in these words may be called the linguistic variable ing, with its two variants, ing in singing and an in singing. Another example of linguistic variable can be seen in words like font and far. Those words are sometimes given our less pronunciations. In this case, we have the linguistic variable r with two variants r and 0 or null. Next slide. Linguists who have studied variation in this way have used a number of linguistic variables, many of which have been phonological. And here is the type of linguistic variable. The first one is the ing variable, such as in fishing and singing, and the r variable in font and far, and the h variable in house and hospital, and the t variable in bed and better, and the t and the variables such as in thin and day. The ing variable has been widely used. According to Lobo 2006 says it has been found to have the greatest generally over the English-speaking world and has been the subject of the most fruitful study. The R variable mentioned above has also been much used. Other useful variables are the age variable in words like house and hospital, that is age or age or null or 0. And the t variable in bed and better is t or th, and the variable is tin and they. Next, the types of linguistic variables. The L variable in France int il or null or zero, and the vowel E for pant and mend, and the vowel O in dog, cup, and coffee, and the vowel E in bag, and the vowel A in back, bag, bed, and half, and the vowel U in full. Studies of variation employing the linguistic variable are not confined solely to the phonological methods. The investigator have looked at the as the third person singular, and as in he talks, that is, its presence or absence, and the occurrence or non-occurrence of be and of its various inflected forms in sentence, such as he's happy, he be happy, and he happy. The occurrence actually virtual, non-occurrence, or the negative particle in parens. And the various aspects, the phenomenon of the multiple negation in English. For example, he don't mean no harm to nobody, and the beginning of English relative clauses, as in she is the girl who or whom I prize, she is the girl that I prize, and she is the girl I prize. So to see how individual researchers choose variables, we can look briefly at 3 landmark studies carried out in 3 areas by prominent sociolinguists in the 1960th century and 1970th century for the New York City by Leboeuf, Norwich by Threadgill, and Detroit by Sui et al. And Wolfram. Okay. Variation in New York City. In a measure of his work in New York City, according to Leboeuf, 1966, choose five phonological variables. The first one is the variables such as thin and three, and then the variable there and then, and the R variable like pom and var, and the A variable is bed and back, and for all variables dog and calf. Here another example for the R, drop the R when it is before a consonant. It is like park, park become park, nurse become nurse, water become water, river become river, and where become where. And we should note that some of these have discrete variants, for example, like the R or null or zero, whereas other require to investigator to quantify the variance because the variant is a continuous phenomenon. For example, like the A variable, where there can be both rising and retraction of the vowel, that is a pronunciation higher and farther back in the mouth, and of course in some environment nasalization too. And variation in Norwich. Variation in Norwich, according to Threadgill 1974, also chose certain phonological variable in his study of speech Norwich. There are 3 consonant variable and 13 vowel variables. The consonant variable were the H in happy and homed, the ing in walking and running, and the T in bed and better. And the 13 vowel variables were the vowel used in words such as bed, name, pet, tell, hear, hair, ride, bird, top, know, boot, and turn. Next slide. Variation in Detroit. One Detroit study, according to Sui et al. 1968, focus on the use of three variables, one phonological variables and two grammatical variables. The phonological variables was the realization of a vowel plus a following nasal consonant as a nasalized vowel. And then the grammatical variables were multiple negations, which we have already mentioned, then and pronominal positions. For example, like that guy, he don't care. Okay, here is the linguistic variable and the indicators, markers, and stereotypes. According to Lebov 1972, has also distinguished among what he calls indicators, markers, and stereotypes. An indicators is a linguistic variable to which little or no social import in a text is attached. And a marker can be quite noticeable and a potent carrier of social information. And for the stereotype, need to conform to reality, rather it offers people a rote and ready categorization with all the attendant problem of such categories. Now we are going to talking about the social variations. Here the social variations, it's so you can see from the picture that there are many people there with a different region, of course, different with different dialect, accent, and etc. And the question is how would you greet these people? If you greet your best friend, your grandmother, your prime minister, or the president of Indonesia. Yeah, when we communicate with other, we often encounter variance in the way we pronounce words, intonation that we use, even our choice of words, although we communicate in the same language. Moreover, the variance will seem obviously when we communicate with people around us in society or people who come from different regions with us. Based on Lebov in Lucas and Bailey 2007 declared that variations refers to the different ways of saying the same thing. It means that the different manner to say the same thing happen during communications activities take place and called variations. Here is the social class membership and social network. For the social class membership, if we one factor which has been prominent in with sociolinguistic studies in variation is social class membership. If we consider social class to be a useful concept to apply in a stratifying society, and few indeed would deny its relevance. And we need a way to determine the social class of particular speakers. So this raises various difficulties, as in many societies there are not strict guidelines and terms such as in the middle class and may have many different meaning for the speaker themselves. And for the social network, in his work, uh, Will Roy found that it was the network of relationship that an individual belonged to that exerted the most powerful and interesting influence on that individual linguist behavior. So when the group of the speaker being investigated show a little variation in social class, however, that is defined. A study of the network of social relationship within the group may allow you to discover how particular linguistic usage can be related to the frequency and density of the certain kinds of the context among speakers. Data collection and analysis. For the data collection and analysis, the once an investigator has made some decision concerning with social variable and must be taken into account and has formed a hypothesis about possible relationship between social and linguistic variations, and the next task becomes one collecting data that will either confirm or refute that hypothesis. In linguistics, this task has two basic dimensions: devising some kind of plan for collecting the relevant data, and then collecting such data form of representative sample of the speaker. Okay, here is the observer paradox by hidden cameras and sound recorders, and the sociolinguistic interview, a casual interview which ideally resembles conversations more than formal question and answer sessions. And for the third is sampling. Sampling is the best sample of all in random sample. In a random sample, everyone in the population to be sampled has an equal chance of being selected. In contrast, in judgment sample, also known as a quota sample, the investigator chooses the subject according to the set of criteria, for example, like age, gender, social, class, education, and so on and so forth. Next, for the data collection is apparent timed and real times, or the time dimension, and the correlation, dependent and independent variable, to see what happened to language when looked at in relation to some factor. We can manipulate the independent variable, for example, like the social class, age, gender, ethnicity, and so on, as one of these chains. And next is the quantitative sociolinguistic. Investigator must be prepared to employ proper statistical procedure, not only in their sampling, but also in the treatment of the data they collect and in testing the various hypotheses they formulate. Here is the summary of the linguistic variable and the social variable. It can be concluded that language variation is systematic differences on how one language is used by different speakers of a language, including with the regional variables, the linguistic variable, and the social variable that affect of those language. Next slide. Here is the example of the language variation in Minang. You can see from the picture, there are dari, diri, mencari, dan caro in our first language. And then the Buffalo Trophy is one of the transcribing data from Minangkabau. And this is the thirdly they try to collect the data where they send to Si Junjung speakers and have them make a recording. Then the last step is the data transcription, and from dari become above dari, And for Kabun Regency is one of the community in Binang, and they have a different dialect to pronounce the word dari become dai, diri become di, mancari become mancai, charo become chayo. And here is the phonetic and vowel and diphthongs from Minangkabau pronunciations. You can see from the picture. I take this from the link. The example of sample text in Minangkabau. Sadonyo manusia dielahi akan merdeka dan punyo martabat. Sarato hak nan samo. Mereka dikaruniai aka johati nurani. Supaya satu sama lain bagaul sarupo urang badun sana. In English is all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. If I see from the one word sadonyo from Minangkabau, and also it with the in English is all, but in my region in Sundanese sadonyo it seems like sadaya. Sadonyo, sadaya, it's like the meaning in English is all. It's almost the same, but it is different. Sadonyo, and in my region in Sundanese is sadaya. And the next one is I take from another journal here from Sasak and Samawa language. From Sasak and Samawa language here, for example, you can look to the picture. For example, here is the researcher tried to look the similar from the Sasak language and Sumbawa language. They are both of them are from Nusa Tenggara Barat, and then for example from the word abu become au for Sasak language, and still same in Sumbawa language with au, and akar and akar. For example, other different is like baru in Sasak language and Baruk in, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry before, Baruk in Sumbawa language. Or another example such as buah in our first language and Sasak language in buak, and Sumbawa language have same pronunciation with buat. And other is like kalau in our first language, and then in Sasak language they pronounce with darak, and in Sumbawa language they pronounce geti, and etc. and so forth. The data used in this study were randomly assigned by looking at the basic grammar words between the Sasak and Samawa ethnic languages, and the vocabulary can be observed in the table that I mentioned before. And thus the result of the simple study are expected to provide a picture of the relationship between two languages in two different ethnic groups in Nusa Tenggara Barat, namely Sasak and Samawa. Both of these ethnic groups are very closely related and clustered in one clan, and will strengthen and tighten the tribal races in Nusa Tenggara Barat in particular, or even in the archipelago in general. Okay, thank you. That's all my presentation about the linguistic variable and the social variable. Back to you, madam.
That's it, our discussion of language variation. Me and Dian would like to say thank you for your attention. See you next time.